All right, everyone. We are going to have our last panel of the day, and so this is also sort of a closing remarks. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. This was such a blast. I feel like every sequencing day is better than the last. So I hope everyone enjoyed. I also feel like this sequencing day was the biggest so far, maybe. Yeah, we had two parallel stages, a lot of really high quality talks, one great priority auction debate, which I personally enjoyed the most. Thanks to our panelists there, and yeah, so thanks for everyone for making this. Such a great event, and thank you to all the organizers. Thanks to Puffer, Espresso Systems, and Radius for sponsoring, but also like everyone who helped out, and Justin Drake also for helping with making the agenda. This is really a community event and is intended to be a community event going forward into the future, not associated with any particular company. We invite other teams who want to participate in organizing this at the next conference to get in touch. That is very much the spirit of this event, and Justin Drake has been really good at keeping it like that. So let's go into our last panel, which I guess I'm participating on. Okay, I guess I have a mic already.
Okay, final closing panel. So one of the things that I noticed after being asked to moderate today is that all three companies are doing execution tickets in some form or another, and you all pivoted from something else. So I guess, what is your story? Like, what did you start with, and why did you pivot to execution tickets?
Yeah, first of all, I probably do an intro to Puffer, what Puffer is. As everybody knows, we just started from an Ethereum Foundation grant to work on anti-slashers. That was the start of Puffer, anti-slashers for Ethereum validators. But today, of course, we came so far to add many more features and expand to more of a verticalized infrastructure. Big shout outs to the big team that we have here, Puffer team. I see like the devs are the front row. They probably have to leave to code right now, but thank you guys. Big shout out. But we wanted to actually implement permissionless validators on Ethereum. Doing permissionless validators on Ethereum had challenges, including the active challenges of MEV stealing that other permissionless LSTs had. Other challenges like lazy node operators. To do a trust minimized or trustless liquid staking protocol, we needed a method to make sure that users actually don't get hurt by these. That's why we started like exploring execution tickets, or we call them validator tickets today. Even though that still it's not perfect, it still needs some refining and touch-ups, we believe it strictly enhanced the user experience for these reasons. Currently, a validator on Ethereum, if they are bonded less than 32 ETH, they basically borrowed a bunch of ETH from the user to run a validator. That's like liquid staking or liquid restaking. They need, the user who staked their ETH needs to trust the validator, not to steal the MEV. The MEV is such a complex task. Many protocols try to do smoothing pools or other things. And this is something, Justin, you call rug pulling. We need to get away from this idea of rug pulling on MEV. And on the other hand, like if there is a trustless validator that we don't know about, is a lazy validator. It's on and 50% of the time and off 50% of the other time. It means it generates zero rewards for the user. We have to also account for that. We have to make sure the user doesn't get hurt by the lazy validators. That's why we adopted validator tickets today on our permissionless validator offers.
Okay, so to summarize, basically you wanted to provide accountability on MEV. MEV is very difficult to account for because you can have these side deals, and so you have execution tickets to basically flesh out the value and express it in an accountable on-chain way.
Correct, yes.
Okay, Ben, what is the story?
Sure, yeah. Well, so let me start by saying that the Espresso network today It doesn't have any form of execution tickets at all yet. What the Espresso network does today is it's a consensus protocol that rollups can publish their blocks to. It reaches consensus on them, and it ensures that when the sequencer publishes those blocks to Ethereum, they must be the same. And that allows anyone who's reading from the Espresso network to execute and confirm blocks just by reading from them. If they trust Espresso consensus, you can view it as a BFT pre-confirmation. That is what the Espresso network does today. And we view that as a building block towards interoperability protocols, right? So you can build both asynchronous and synchronous message passing protocols on top of that. Now, one of the things that's interesting about synchronous message passing, which enables synchronous composability, is that it requires rollups to share a sequencer, right? Or some form of coordination in their block building. One special example of that is base sequencing, where literally the shared coordinated block builder is also the block builder of the L1. And that enables synchronous composability with the L1. When we started out pitching rollups on the idea of sharing a sequencer, we realized that there's this social coordination problem. So first of all, not every rollup may want to synchronously compose with others. Okay, fine. But some may, and some may want the advantage of synchronous composability. But there's a social coordination problem of choosing a shared sequencer. And there's even a social coordination problem of deciding to use the L1 block builder as a shared sequencer. And so, the simple proposal that we had is, okay, how about just look at it as a marketplace problem, right? How about instead of viewing it as let's choose a shared sequencer, just have everyone basically auction off the right to sequence. And if indeed there's value to be had from synchronous composability, then the efficient market solution will be that there will be shared sequencers that come in and buy up multiple sequencing rights. And in fact, if there's so much value to be had from synchronously composing with the L1 itself, then the L1 proposers will be able to bid the highest in order to become the shared sequencer. And so this is a way to solve that social coordination problem. Now, what it does require then is to run such a marketplace is it requires selling sequencing rights ahead of time. The reason is that it is very difficult to do this in a censorship-resistant way in real time, because you kind of need consensus. You need a very short-term consensus, and that's just something that's hard to have. Mm-hmm. And so, you either run a centralized auction to do it in real time, but if you don't want to run a centralized auction, you want to do it in a decentralized way, then you need to run this auction ahead of time. So, and let me clarify, the reason why you want censorship resistance is otherwise you have no way of enforcing on-chain that the value of the auction goes to the rollups. When the rollups are selling their sequencing right, if you're giving it to an untrusted party to run that, then the untrusted party can make side deals with the sequencers and basically report lower bids and not give the value to the rollups who are selling it in order to acquire it. So that's why we propose running a ahead of time auction. But a lot of people have pointed out problems with ahead of time auctions, and so since we haven't shipped this feature yet, this is still an open design question for us, and we're always looking for feedback from the users of such an auction, which would be rollups, and of course researchers who have already pointed out many good things about the advantages or disadvantages of ahead of time versus real time auctions.
So if you wouldn't do an ahead of time auction, would you do a just in time auction or no auction at all?
So what you can do is you can allow every rollup to run its own real-time auction, and so every rollup basically decides its own way of doing that. Maybe it's centralized, so a rollup just has its own sequencer and sells the sequencing right in a centralized way. So it's like the job of the sequencer now is, or there's a centralized party who either does the sequencing or auctions off the sequencing right. Maybe it implements some consensus protocol that's running on just a few nodes, and that gives it, maybe it's easier to implement short-term censorship resistance on just a few nodes. I mean, it's a stronger trust assumption, of course. The disadvantage of this is that you can't really do a combinatorial auction. So you don't make it efficient for bidders to bid on combinations of rollups, and so it's less likely to end up with the most efficient market solution, which is a shared sequencer.
Okay, understood. Sounds like a fairly big recent pivot, I guess.
Can I ask a challenging question? Would this auction change if we are a priority fee-based rollup versus a first-come, first-serve rollup? Because
Sorry, say that, repeat the question?
So if you're a priority, like basically a priority fee-based rollup.
If you're a priority fee-based rollup?
Yeah, so basically MEV can exist. And then if we're just a first-come, first-serve rollup, would these rights to sequence change because there is a big opportunity of potential MEV extraction on these?
So I think that in general, if you are selling the right to sequence, then it becomes extra complicated to enforce specific transaction ordering policies, right? Now you can do it by restricting who's allowed to purchase your sequencing right. So a simple example is you can restrict that the buyers of your sequencing rights have to be running a trusted execution environment or something that implements, that enforces some kind of ordering policy, but in general, protocols that care strongly about implementing based on, I don't know, maybe some Byzantine fault tolerant assumption, a first come first served system would have a difficult time, basically selling on an open market their sequencing right. In general, we don't really. I think that there's going to be a diversity of opinions out there in terms of what rollups want to do and what kind of trade-offs they want to take between, wanting to have composability and synchronous composability, wanting to capture, their MEV to the maximum extent, and they're going to have to sort of make choices between optimizing for some of these different things. Espresso as a solution primarily is the network, is this confirmation layer, and we're trying to create products that help rollups have a variety of ways of being able to choose how to do their sequencing, including shared sequencing.
AJ, you were working on, when we first met, you were talking about encrypted mempools and shared sequencing, and now it sounds like you've moved a little bit closer to the execution ticket direction. I guess, why the pivot?
Okay, first of all, I need to explain what Radius is building right now. So Radius is developing its own network called Lighthouse with secure block building solution to support rollups building a profitable block by extracting good MEV while protecting users from harmful MEV such as front-running and sandwich attack. So with more technical details, we split a rollups block space into two parts, top-up block and bottom-up block. And then each part is built by different entities. Top-up block is built by searchers. So searchers get latest block states from sequencer and then do some back-running stuff, and then Lighthouse conduct the auctions among multiple searchers and then choose the bundles with highest bid will be included in a top-up block in next block. And then the bottom-up block will include transactions from users via encrypted mempool, so we can protect these users from the malicious attacks, such as this harmful MEV stuff. So each part is built simultaneously, which means that searchers cannot do any malicious front-running stuff while the bottom block is built. So that's how our Lighthouse network is working. Before actually, and then the exchange ticket is needed because the entity who wants this top of block most would be the searchers who are doing this non-atomic arbitrage between like sex and dex or a cross roll-up thing. So at that time, make sure that guarantee this execution those transactions is really important. So that's why we are thinking of applying this, adopting this execution tickets for this top of block stuff. And then before the execution ticket, we actually, as Justin, you mentioned, we tried to solve the two problems that our rollup space has. One is that centralized sequencer. Another one is the fragmented liquidity. So to solve this centralized sequencer, the reason why we are focusing on to solve centralized sequencer is that this sequencer has a full control of block building, which means that you just might get some attacks from this malicious behavior, might be. So we thought that, okay, let's encrypt transactions so no one can see the contents of transactions, so there's no harmful MEV stuff can happen. So that's some kind of an idea. But the thing is that it's kind of an important issue, but it's not like that important among the community. So that's why we move on to next problem, which is the composability stuff. So that's why when we came up with some kind of a shared sequencing stuff, but it's not, there's some misconception that like, actually rollups don't like this concept because they think that share the sequencer take some kind of control or MEV profits from them, so which is totally untrue, not true. But it's kind of difficult to persuade them to opting in shared sequencing thing. So and then after that, we found out that okay, making profits is more important issue for rollups because this giving incentive to all participants among ecosystem would be the best way to give rollups economic growth. So that's the history of the Radius.
Okay, great. So you mentioned moving away from centralized sequences at one point. Does everyone here agree that we will eventually have a majority of decentralized sequencers versus centralized sequencers? It's meant to be a yes/no question.
Yeah, so I know you ask it, like probably I can add some explainers here. I think having a shared state, like synchronous composability, is a must if you want to tap into the capital market of Ethereum itself. Like if you want to have access to that capital market, so you can share it between rollups, you have DeFi platforms, lending protocols, AMMs, you want it to have access to as much capital market as possible. So they need some format of a shared sequencer / decentralized sequencer to achieve this, to get there.
Shared sequencer and decentralized sequencer are not the same, right?
Yeah, they're definitely not the same thing.
But you're saying that a decentralized sequencer is required to achieve
Yeah.
the shared sequencing.
Yes. But the thing is, to me, in out of context of just decentralizing the sequencer for the sake of decentralizing it, I think it might be a little not applicable.
Right.
Because it slows down. And there are people who are just, like, I make this joke that they want to run YouTube on their rollups. They want that 100, 200K, 1 million TPS to be able to be like very, 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 very fast. But they don't care about like composability. Even the users choose to trust them. And if we go to decentralized sequencers now, we have 3 out of 4, I don't know, 4 out of 4 kind of like sequencers that are gonna like do some certain stuff. Still, like, we don't have like a great liveness guarantee. We just have kind of trust minimized operations here. That's why I feel like it's not that massive of a move or value add. That's why people wouldn't want to go there.
Okay, so the big opportunity in your opinion is shared sequencing, and the only way to get there is with decentralized sequencing.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
So I agree that decentralized sequencing is in general a prerequisite for shared sequencing at scale. And at scale, but I mean at scales, I mean involving many, rollups with independent characteristics and communities, etc. We will maybe see shared sequencing clusters within certain, close-knit groups. And so, insofar as people migrate to shared sequencing, which I agree is very powerful and enables synchronous composability, what I personally think should happen versus what actually happens are two different questions, right? And so I do think that and it's something that I've struggled with, and I keep asking people this same question that I ask myself is, synchronous composability is a really powerful thing, but we can also achieve a lot with asynchronous composability. And really, what is the delta between them, right? And is that delta enough to overcome kind of the social friction of moving towards decentralized shared sequencing, or base sequencing, which amazingly enables synchronous composability with the L1. Now, there's a separate question, which is like, okay, independent of synchronous composability and shared sequencing, are we just going to move towards decentralized sequencing for censorship resistance and other reasons? And I would hope that it seems pretty core to the identity of Web3 that we would do so, and unless there's a serious UX trade-off, why not? At least it will happen in it might happen in terms of rollups just implementing their own decentralized solutions, and that has certain inefficiencies. I think we probably all agree on this panel over using a common decentralized sequencing solution, or be it based sequencing or something else. Unless you have that synchronous composability drive, there is a strong incentive for rollups to just do it themselves. Or there seems to be a tendency towards that.
Okay, interesting. So it almost sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether we'll ever achieve decentralized sequencing, because if there's no need for synchrony because the gap is so small with asynchrony, then the centralized sequences are kind of good enough from a censorship and liveness perspective, then we might never see actually the decentralized sequences.
I think we'll see decentralized sequencing. It's just that it may be that each rollup will implement its own decentralized sequencing solution, rather than seeing a sort of common convention over using one decentralized sequencing solution, such as base sequencing. I also think that the decentralizing the sequencing, it comes in two parts. One is adding a security layer to what the sequencer confirms, so having secure pre-confirmations that are not just reliant on the sequencer, and that is what, for example, the BFT consensus that Espresso is building, or even just the layer 1 provides it, but if you have faster block times on the layer 1, then that could be also serve as something that replaces the confirmations that sequencers give today. And then the second part is actually decentralizing the party that's proposing transactions. And that's what I think you mean by decentralized sequencing more so, which is that there isn't just one party who proposes the transactions. It's a rotation of parties. But these are two different things. I think that already strengthening the confirmations that come from the centralized sequencer, so that if the centralized sequencer gets hacked or it's malicious, it can't fool people into accepting a transaction that then gets reorged, is already a great step in the right direction, and it's an easier step. It's the step that we've taken by deploying the Espresso network.
Actually, I'm a little bit confused now, because my understanding was that as a rollup that kind of opts into the Espresso pre-confirmation framework, you're actually giving away your sequencing rights.
No,
you're not.
You're not. Yeah. So it's not a requirement. You can have a centralized sequencer and publish your blocks to Espresso network. The key thing is that the smart contract for your rollup will enforce that whatever was published to Espresso is also published to Ethereum. So it acts as a secure, adds sort of a BFT pre-confirmation to what the centralized sequencer proposed. Right. But if you were to take it a step further and then anoint the L1 proposer as your sequencer, now you're a decentralized base rollup using BFT pre-confirmations from Espresso, right? If you were to use a different decentralized sequencing solution, you're now a decentralized sequencer with, again, the strong BFT pre-confirmations of Espresso.
Okay, gotcha.
From my perspective, I don't know when the decentralized sequencing actually happens, but the obvious thing is that we don't need the same level of decentralizing for rollups compared to Ethereum, because rollups for scalability, so might be decentralized sequencing, put some overhead when achieve this scalability thing. But what's good with decentralized sequencing is that we can bring more people and participants to that rollup ecosystem. I think that's the one reason that rollup might consider to go for decentralized sequencing. And then another reason that I think is that if we want to some kind of extract value, MEV value from sequencing stuff, having centralized sequencing and extracting MEV might be not good signal for their users, because might be some misbehavior can happen. So having decentralized sequencing in that some neutral way would be good for rollups to have some signal for users that we don't do any like bad thing for them as well. So that's what I see decentralized sequencing.
Can I also take
go ahead.
I just want to like take it, just make it spicy. Decentralized sequencing is never going to happen. There's not enough incentive for it. Why? It says consensus is squared. Like, because we went to L2, save gas cost, compress transactions. Let's slap another consensus on it, make it again a little more expensive. Just I'm afraid I'm gonna get censored. That's why I feel like it's just the
Sorry, I didn't understand.
So it's like I feel like decentralized sequencing is just an overhead of like just added overhead to running a roll up, and it's not gonna really help push the industry forward. That's my hot take on this.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if we want to dwell on that question, but like I would then like have you unpack, first of all, what is the overhead? I mean, that depends on the solution. There's many different solutions for decentralizing a sequencer, and here again we're talking about rotating the party that's proposing transactions, which in itself doesn't necessarily, it's not obvious why that necessarily introduces an overhead. Yeah.
Coordination overhead. How do you pick these guys?
Well, like, how do you quantify the overhead? Like, what is the overhead?
Yeah. So like, you have a coordination problem, then you have to like, why are we picking these 4 new, like, people? Like, who like, how are you quantifying decentralization? Are you going to be 100,000 people?
Sure, but like, are we talking about latency? Are we talking about, like, I'm saying, like, we have to sort of, qualify a bit more precisely what we mean by overhead and how it manifests for the user experience.
So it's either going to be like technical overhead, latency overhead, or coordination overhead. And in the case that I proposed, I was like, imagine there is no technical overhead and there is no latency overhead, right? We just added like 100 parties to now sequence our transactions. What is the value add of this beyond censorship resistance?
I thought so you just said earlier that the value add of one of the value adds of decentralized sequencing, besides censorship resistance, or which is like a core tenet of like Web3, the purpose of Web3 was also composability, in that it's difficult to agree upon a fixed shared sequencing.
Yes, exactly. Like I feel like I'm on the 2 extremes. Like we have to have decentralized. Maybe I'll explain it further. If we want to achieve composability through shared sequencing, the easiest path there is to kind of not go through coordination layers, right? That's why we're doing a base rollup. It doesn't really have that many coordination layers.
No, you just contradicted yourself.
Yeah, so let me actually go back now to decentralized. Then I'm just saying, doing decentralized solution just for doing the decentralization and censorship resistance might not happen because it doesn't have a lot of incentive alignment. But going for composability or shared sequencing, it is a good move. But I'm just saying, like a lot of discussions are around less just decentralized sequencers to just achieve the censorship resistance. And I'm just saying, if we're just aiming to do it for that reason, it might never happen.
Got it.
So one of the recent mental models that I have is that we're going to abstract away the notion of a slot duration, right? There's been a progress going from 10-minute slot times with Bitcoin to 12 seconds to 400 milliseconds with Solana. But then I think that with pre-confirmations, we might be able to just abstract away the notion entirely and go down to just one tick time, which is maybe 1 millisecond. Like, do you agree with this end game, and do you agree with the idea that slot times don't actually matter so much? And one of the reasons why that might be a good thing for Ethereum is that we can keep relatively large slot times and give us lots and lots of decentralization, and still be able to abstract away the UX downsides of the large slot times.
Yeah, I'm for it if it gets fast, but I think it's very challenging. Like, as we always like UX wise, like for example, inclusion pre-comps versus execution pre-comps, these things get challenging. But overall, like in short, I would say this is certainly beneficial for a lot of applications, and lower latency is going to be better for us if we keep the actual slot time large, while we be able to actually achieve it through pre-comps or other things. But I know there is also a lot of debate around like other challenges that decreasing the actual slot time introduces. But I think overall, I'm positive, and this is a good breakthrough that we really like.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. So, there's two things here. There's one is just like the latency of a user's transaction, right? And so with longer slot times, meaning that we can take longer to build blocks, then a user submits its transaction to the mempool and has to wait longer to see the results of that, right? So there's just a latency experience from a user from the time it actually sends its transaction to a mempool to the time that it actually gets included in a block, right? But then there's the other side of it, which is that, okay, regardless of the slot time, we can even have 12 seconds or 1 minute slot times, right? After something is proposed, right? How quickly does the network know what the state is, right? So after there's longer slot times basically means they have a longer time to apply the next update. But then there's another parameter, which is how quickly does everyone know what the new state is after it was proposed, right? I think that you've made, I think you make some great points about in your debate with Anatoly about slot times, right? And an argument for having maybe reasonably longer slot times, not too long, right? But they don't have to be within a few milliseconds, right? But I do think that it's important to have a relatively fast synchronization of state, because this is very important, at least for interoperability, right? And especially when you have multiple chains that are trying to communicate messages to each other, the ability to reach finality quickly on whatever was updated by the rollup, and to have it to have strong security around that, and not just be trusting centralized parties to report what was processed by that rollup is extremely important, and it's sort of independent from the slot time.
Okay, so are you talking about basically the finality time?
Yes, finality time, but it's connected. You could argue that if you have longer slot times, then it doesn't make sense to have a 1 millisecond finality time, right? Because relatively speaking, that's not relevant. But the longer the slot time, then the longer, the more leeway you have around sort of the finality time. You don't want to have slot times which are so long that then the finality time also becomes very long.
Right. I mean, that might be an advantage of base sequencing, whereby you don't have the problem of lack of synchronization between your forced inclusion path and your default path. And so if the L1 reorgs, then everything reorgs. And so it's kind of a cleaner and simpler design.
Well, you also have that properties with rollups, for example, that use a network like Espresso, because rollups have the property today that they don't, like rollups today with centralized sequencers, they have extremely fast finality if you trust the centralized sequencer. They're not dependent on L1 reorgs, because the deposits into the rollup aren't recognized into the rollup until L1 reaches finality, right?
Yeah, that's the downside, that you have to wait a very long time to force include.
that is the downside of deposits from the L1. But if you're not looking at interactions between the L1 and the L2, and you're just looking at L2s, transactions within L2s, and transactions across L2s via async interoperability between them, if you have a fast consensus protocol that can be used to secure information about the states of these different chains, then yeah, you have that advantage.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ben's and Justin's opinion about the based sequencing and pre-confirmation have really great benefits in terms of the finality. And then from my perspective, the pre-confirmation is definitely needed to improve the user experience. And then pre-confirmation for inclusion is kind of easy to implement, but I think true value of pre-confirmation is actually from the guarantee this execution, but which is I think quite challenging to implement. I don't know how to do that, but if we could implement that in practical way, I think we could do much more better to give user experience a great user experience.
Does anyone have a burning question for the panel? It can be spicy.
Yeah, just roast us.
Okay, maybe think about it, and I'm happy to ask one more question. Do you think sequencing will be winner take most, in the sense that we'll have a cluster of shared sequencing, and then that will end up having very, very strong network effects?
Yeah. Well, I want it to be winner take most, and I want it to be the base layer, because that's like where we want it to be. But if you want to look at it again, this goes back to the like sort of discussion that I made earlier. Is it that shared sequencing is great to have? If we have to create a coordination layer for it, then we have to try and get a cluster to coordinate with each other to share sequence.
Maybe define what you mean by coordination layers, so just that people understand.
Yeah,
I
exactly. Like
understand
coordination layer, like execution tickets you guys provided for selling like sequencing, right?
Oh, you're talking about a marketplace. You're not talking about the Espresso network today. You're talking about a marketplace whereby you would have some market mechanism of selling the right to sequence to the L1 proposer.
Yes,
Gotcha.
that's one side of it. The other side of it is, okay, it's like less open market and closed market. Let's say now Uniswap and Aave have to come into an agreement to use a shared sequencer for their own app chains. And that's another type of coordination, of course, that they have to have an agreement. They have to be like, okay, let's share a state. And now they have to trust each other to achieve this. These are the two different levels. And I feel like the closest path to get to the biggest cluster without having to go through this is going through based rollups and based sequencing, because there is availability of the volunteers in the market, which is all the validators that would prefer to extract as much value as they want. Therefore, they would like to sequence transactions to be able to extract more value. And it would be just an easier path to having a bigger cluster, kind of like take all. And once we get to that bigger cluster that takes all, we achieve better composability.
Why not make the L1 proposer pay for it though? Why should rollups just allow the L1 proposer to sequence for them rather than paying for that right?
Yeah, I think there can be different economical models for it, depending on how we want to like make it for us. But right now, I believe it's just, now we're talking just about the economies of it, right? If a user should pay, for example, for a peer confirmation to the base layer validator, so they just pay them to include the transaction, versus if that base layer should purchase the right to process this. But I would say it becomes more complicated, and of course, execution tickets for just and at the home staker is going to be way less viable to actually try to guess how much they can get from the next block on the sequencer transactions. how much they should bid for it. It just adds more complexity for those like users as well, in my opinion. That's why it might be just easier to just set a pre-conf price and they get to extract values. And since if we get the entire validator set and we get the randomness that we want out of these sequencers, which is the randomness of Ethereum itself, it is going to be fair.
Okay, now's the opportunity to ask a question, spicy question, if you have one, before we close out the panel. Does the panelists have any spicy question?
I don't know. Solana. No. Are we like, again, like I don't know. I always like say this on every panel, like, but I think you also mentioned it earlier. Like, I always have this sort of concern of us in Ethereum selling infra, not selling dApps, and like how we think about it. It's like the way we do it is like, I just talked to actually Google Cloud person here, right? It's, imagine we're taking Google Cloud and selling it to customers on the street. We're like saying, come use Google Cloud, come use Google Cloud. Like, that's what we are in Ethereum right now. We're not telling them use PayPal, use Venmo. We're just telling them, my Google Cloud better than your Google Cloud. I'm AWS, your Google Cloud. That's how we're selling Ethereum today. And like, this is my take. I'm wondering what the other panelists also like think about this. Yeah, or Sam, you have something. I feel like you just want to ask a question.
Yeah, I agree with Sam on this. I know there's been a lot.
Just for the recording, Sam said the PayPals and the Venmos are coming.
Awesome.
Sam said winter is coming. The day that PayPal and Venmo deploy rollups is.
Well, apparently Robinhood is deploying a rollup. Did I understand correctly?
So, no. Yeah, I was agreeing with Sam. So.
Yes.
No, wait. So I
the
wanted
question
to say
was,
that
is this recorded?
So I think that like there's been there's been this kind of debate or narrative or I don't know, Twitter meme about how there's too much infra, there's not enough focus on development. I think to echo what Sam was saying, these are two different problems. There need to be people in the space who are focusing on building end user applications. There need to be people in the space who are focusing on infrastructure. Those things are not mutually exclusive. The more that we improve the infrastructure to enable things like fast, cheap transactions, which is what rollups have brought us right over the past few years, and then now on top of fast, cheap transactions, the ability to also have strong interoperability between applications deployed to different rollups that achieve these fast, cheap transactions. This is all in service of being able to build applications that we have in Web 2, right? And so people should definitely be working on that, but these things are complementary to each other. So, I sort of roll my eyes every time people have this like, oh, too much infra and like not enough focus on development. They're not mutually exclusive. They also I'm a founder of a company that's building infrastructure. I'm not going to build a company that is like, building Venmo and bringing that to end users. Like that's not my wheelhouse. So it's not like we're competing for the same resources here. Like there's different companies doing different things. The people who are good at building infrastructure should do that, and the people who are good at building end user products should do that.
Yeah. So I agree with that. I'm in agreement with you that they're not mutually exclusive. But when we go to the public user facing, right? We're talking to some user who is interested to use crypto for its decentralization, for its censorship resistance, for all these promises that it came with, that it's a better financial system, right? We talk too much about short slot times and fast finality to them. They don't need this information. That's my opinion. Like, let's have a separation of setups. we're going out and we're like saying that I
You're
don't
saying
know.
it's a sales problem. You're saying the sales department is
Exactly.
saying the wrong thing.
Exactly.
They're
That's
telling people this is a pre-confirmation. That's kind of not.
that's the challenge. It's like even like maybe VCs a little bit or others. They're just like, oh, this is an amazing infra, but like to the normal day-to-day users, they might not see a real use case for this. And I don't know. That's where we wanted to step up. We wanted to provide proof of concepts, actually, of like some of the applications of this infra for the users to actually make a connection to it. So we potentially are going to have our own based app chain coming out soon that has one of these use cases. So we can say, okay, great infra enabled this great use case that you can solve your day-to-day issue.
Interesting. So it's kind of like a template app chain, maybe similar to EigenLay having this template of EigenDA for AVSs. Oh, we do have one final question.
They want a roll-up design that they can just plug and play. They don't have any builders or developers or Web3 anything. They are Web3, retarded, to be honest. And they want to just plug and play. And I think until very recently, I had a difficult time saying to them, here, take this solution and go with it. But I think that we're there. So I think despite all the kind of hand waving about infra, I think it has been a good investment, and I think we're thankfully kind of almost there.
Hear, hear. All right. I think we should probably wrap up. Yeah, it's getting.
Yes.
We've been here a long time. Thanks for everyone. Do you want to say any closing remarks or for the panel, for the event?
I mean, as you said, this is one of the biggest and best sequencing days. Hopefully, we're on the up and up. And I'm always optimistic. I'm a perma optimist, and I'm just amazed at how much progress we've made in 2024. We had, is it like 3 sequencing days? We had a whole sequencing week. We had 16 calls, and I think the people in this room and all the energy is a testament to that. So thank you everyone for helping build the future.